I'll tell it the way it felt from my side, because sometimes the smallest things become the loudest signals, and this week it was a jacket and a shirt, and the fact that I showed up to a podcast the same way I show up to most things, which is focused on the ideas rather than the costume. And suddenly the internet decided that what I wore mattered as much as what I said, which is kind of fascinating if you think about it, because we're living in an age where rockets land themselves. Neural interfaces are moving from science fiction to clinical trials, and yet a slightly rumpled outfit can trend faster than a discussion about civilization-level risks or long-term energy sustainability. So there I was, sitting in the studio, lights on, microphones ready, talking about technology, responsibility, humor, free speech, and the future, wearing something comfortable because comfort lets me think clearly. And afterward I learned that people were zooming in on the jacket, comparing it to past appearances, joking that I looked like I'd just walked out of a late night coding session, or that I'd dressed like a billionaire who forgot he was a billionaire. And honestly, that made me smile, because it says more about culture than it does about me. Since my relationship with clothing has always been utilitarian, almost engineering driven, like if it works and doesn't distract me, it's good enough. And that philosophy didn't change just because a camera was pointed at me. But what was interesting was how quickly the commentary became playful rather than hostile. Memes popping up, captions imagining my closet as 5 identical black jackets. People joking that the outfit was a secret signal about markets or Mars or some hidden chess move. And I watched it unfold, thinking this is actually a kind of social experiment. Because fashion in public life is a proxy for relatability, rebellion, conformity, and status all at once. And by not leaning into traditional power dressing, I accidentally reinforced this image of someone who doesn't quite fit the mold, which is fine because I never really have. And on the podcast itself, I talked about work ethic, curiosity, and why humor matters when you're dealing with pressure. And somehow the outfit became part of that story. Like it visually underlined the message that I'm more interested in substance than polish, even though I respect polish when it serves a purpose. And I saw people defending the look too, saying it was refreshing, that it felt human, that not every public appearance needs to be styled within an inch of its life. And that part resonated with me, because the future we're building shouldn't be obsessed with appearances at the expense of progress. Yet, I also get why people find it entertaining, because humans are narrative-driven and visuals are powerful shortcuts, so a simple jacket can become a symbol, a joke, a talking point, a way for millions of people to participate in the moment without needing to parse complex discussions about AI alignment or space logistics. And if that's the entry point that gets them engaged, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Because attention is a scarce resource, and sometimes it arrives wrapped in humor, so I let the commentary roll, didn't rush to explain or defend anything, because there was nothing to defend. It was just me showing up as myself. And if that sparks a few laughs and a few conversations about why we expect leaders to dress a certain way, then that's part of the broader dialogue about authenticity, image, and expectations in a hyper-connected world. And at the end of the day, when the memes fade and the trends move on, the work continues, the ideas keep evolving, and the jacket goes back in the chair, ready for the next conversation, the next podcast, the next unexpected moment where something trivial becomes a mirror reflecting how society sees power, individuality, and the humans behind the headlines. After the trending charts reset and the jokes slow down, because that's when you get a clearer signal of what actually landed. And I remember scrolling through reactions late at night, not obsessively but with curiosity, because feedback loops matter whether you're building software or understanding culture. And what stood out wasn't the criticism or the praise, but the projection. People using my appearance as a canvas to paint their own ideas about wealth, power, rebellion, minimalism, distraction, seriousness, even laziness. And that's when it clicked again, how public figures stop being just people and become symbols that others remix in real time. And I've experienced that with rockets, cars, tweets, jokes, and now apparently jackets. And there's a strange efficiency to it because symbolism compresses complexity. A single image can replace 1,000 words. So when I show up looking slightly unpolished, it signals something whether I intend it or not. And I've learned that you don't fully control the signal once it leaves you. You can only decide whether to play the game consciously or ignore it. And for me, the calculus has always been simple. If spending more time thinking about clothes means spending less time thinking about engineering, then it's not a good trade. But I also understand that public communication isn't just about logic. It's about emotion and relatability. And maybe that's why the reaction skewed lighthearted this time. Because people sensed there was no performative edge to it, no attempt to craft a persona, just a guy talking and thinking and occasionally rambling. And I saw comments saying it reminded them of early tech culture when founders showed up in hoodies because they cared more about building than branding, and others saying it was ironic that even not trying becomes a brand. Which is true and kind of funny because there's no real escape from interpretation once you're visible, and I don't pretend otherwise. I just choose not to optimize for it. And what I appreciated most was how the conversation briefly pivoted from what I wore to why we care so much about what leaders wear, why a suit signals authority, and why breaking that signal feels disruptive. And disruption is something I'm comfortable with, not for its own sake, but because progress usually looks strange at first, and if a slightly awkward outfit makes people question their assumptions, even subconsciously, that's not entirely wasted energy. And I also noticed younger audiences reacting differently, more amused than judgmental, less concerned with polish and more with authenticity, which aligns with broader shifts in culture where transparency and imperfection are increasingly valued over curated perfection. And that gives me some optimism because the problems we're facing aren't solvable by people who are afraid to look imperfect while experimenting. And as the week went on, the memes evolved. Some playful, some absurd, some surprisingly clever. And I didn't feel the need to respond because sometimes silence lets the moment breathe and resolve itself. And eventually attention moved on as it always does. But the experience reinforced something I've believed for a long time, that public appearances are less about controlling perception and more about being consistent with your values, because consistency builds trust even when it looks unconventional. And if my value system prioritizes curiosity, speed, humor, and substance over surface level aesthetics, then that will show up everywhere, from how I speak to how I dress And people can take from that whatever they want, because in the end, the story isn't really about the outfit or the podcast or the trend. It's about how we assign meaning, how easily we get distracted, and how, even in a world of immense technological change, we're still very human. Still drawn to symbols, still laughing, still debating, still watching each other closely. And I'm okay being part of that spectacle as long as it doesn't replace the mission. Because tomorrow there's work to do, problems to solve, and probably another jacket to throw on without thinking twice about it. Part 3 is where I zoom out a little more, because once you've lived through enough cycles of attention, you start to see the patterns repeat. And this one fit neatly into a familiar curve: initial curiosity, amplification through humor, saturation, and then decay. And during that decay phase, I tend to think about what, if anything, is worth carrying forward, because not every moment deserves to be archived in your head, but some moments are useful as data points. And this one reminded me that visibility is a kind of gravity. It bends narratives toward you whether you want it to or not. And that means even neutrality gets interpreted as intention. So when people asked internally whether I'd do anything differently next time, the honest answer was no. Not because I'm stubborn for the sake of it, but because optimizing for external expectations is a moving target with no stable solution. And engineering taught me early that you don't chase unstable systems. You redesign the framework or you accept the noise, and I've chosen acceptance, which frees up mental bandwidth for things that actually compound over time.